Hey, welcome to episode one, season one of our podcast, interviewing different IWs from around the world. I'm Brandon Nutter, David Nishizaki here, and our guest is Tony Roos, who is currently living in Paris, France. We wanted to just kind of talk to different IWs about struggles they're currently facing, maybe even some victories that are going on in their lives, how ministry is being impacted as we all wrestle with COVID-19 all around the world. So I just want to have you guys introduce yourselves, and then we'll kind of just jump in.
I'm David Nishizaki. Sorry to cut you off, Tony. Aaliyah is my wife. We've been married 10 years. We've worked with Envision for a number of years. We're currently in Washington, D.C., have spent the last two and a half years starting a ministry initiative with Envision to create access to alliance work for the deaf community. So helping deaf people make their way around the world through the different opportunities with Envision and Alliance, and then also working to connect with the deaf community locally here in Washington, D.C. So we are here in Washington, D.C. under an order to stay at home.
I'm Tony Roos. My wife Rainey and I have been here in the Paris area for about 8 years working with Envision. We came and established Envision France to facilitate short-term teams and host midterm internships and residents. We work alongside of the local church, providing relational ministry opportunities, ways for people to connect with other Christians, or ways to connect non-Christians to Christians and then to the church. We really believe that the glory of God is going to be revealed to this lost world through his church. So we do everything we do in partnership with a local church or in an attempt to establish a local church. We have 2 children, 18 and 15-year-old girls who prior to we call it a confinement here in France, were in Black Forest Academy, a boarding school in Germany. Right before the borders shut down between Germany and France, about three and a half weeks ago now, I and another IW here in France drove 6 hours each way to pick up our daughters from the boarding school so that they could be home at this time.
And I'd say my name is Brandon, and my wife and I, we serve in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, and we've been here for about 6 years, including 1 year back in the U.S. on home assignment. Working with the National Church, leadership development, community development kind of issues. We were in Santiago for 4.5 years, and now we've been here in Santo Domingo for not quite a year. So we love it here. It's not too bad to be in quarantine when it's 80 degrees all the time. We're not complaining about that. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for joining us. I just wanted to just kind of touch base, Tony, with you specifically. What are the specifics of the quarantine? How is your country handling the craziness of all this?
Yeah, so the specifics are you're not to leave your apartment or house unless you have a valid reason. Some of the valid reasons are, of course, if you are an essential worker or your business is still open and you have a letter from your company work that says you're working still and you're headed to work. You can go for doctor's visits, to visit people that are sick and in need. If you are on the way for a family type of thing, then you can also go out grocery shopping, buying your necessities is the word they use. And also you have 1 hour a day to be outside to practice sport. That's how we say exercise. So to be out exercising or whatever, but recently that has changed in different communities where it's only before 10 a.m. and after 7 p.m. that you're allowed to go out and exercise. So while we've been in lockdown officially for just over 3 weeks, officially, there has been a continued revamping of what that looks like because the change from you can go out and exercise at any time to now before 10 and after 7 just went into practice yesterday or maybe today even, so on this Wednesday.
Tony, are there any sports that you're practicing?
I am walking outside. Sports I practice are few and far between, and therefore I just go out for a walk. We have a small little French bulldog that walks around and goes wherever he wants to go. So we take him out. He's never been on so many walks in his life.
And you
He's
explained to
loving
us before that you have to have a note with you.
Yeah, the
Explain
French
that.
government is all about notes and stamps and approval. So you have to give yourself approval to go out, carry your passport, and write a little note saying this is why I'm going out, and be able to prove kind of what you're doing, where you're going. It has your address on it, and in theory, the sport, your exercise supposed to be within 1 kilometer of your house. It's about a half a mile for the Americans.
Have you had to show your note to anyone yet?
I have not been lucky enough to encounter any officer of the law to be able to produce my note. I have not gone out without it, so there's that. That's kind of good. When they announced the added 2 weeks, my daughter did run to the end of our driveway in the middle of the street in frustration without her note, and then came back about 30 seconds later. So she rebelled for a little bit, but she came back. So
That's good. That's good. What's it like encountering someone on the street, like when you're doing your sport? Are they all nervous? Are they like?
It's an interesting balance between walking past them at a safe distance, but also saying hello, which you would never do normally in French culture. In the bigger towns, in the bigger cities, you walk right past somebody without making eye contact or even acknowledging them. Where here, I think there's even a, oh, I need some sort of attention, or I need some sort of interaction with other people. So when I see you walking by and you don't look too scary, I'm going to say hello. So I've actually had more hellos from people in the last week than I have in the last 8 years. That's an exaggeration, of course, but conversations with the neighbors as you pass them are a little bit longer than they were before. Everybody's checking to make sure everybody's okay. So, but you can tell when somebody doesn't want to go over and they're a little nervous, they're very grateful that you move over 3 feet and walk in the street so they can continue walking on the sidewalk. So it's kind of one of those dichotomies of you're further apart, but yet closer together, maybe.
That's cool.
That's interesting.
Hopefully not some opportunities for you guys. That'd be really cool. Yeah. Were you gonna say something, Dave?
No, I was just saying that's really interesting because I think the ways that people are reacting and responding, I would say Aaliyah and I went to the grocery store last week and it was awkward. I would say it was a fair mix of acknowledging people, but there was a definite trepidation of distance and even like interacting with people, which felt noticeably different. So to hear your perspective and experience, yeah, that's cool. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely in the neighborhood feel. I've been to the grocery store, some of the larger ones, and there's still somebody coming by and they don't know where to go, and there's kind of a look of fear in their eye. Do I turn towards this person or that person, or I'm just going to stop and wait for you to move, type of thing. So unlike normally where our grocery stores are, they're not overly packed, but they're very busy on an average grocery shopping day, where you're bumping into people, you're kind of both opening the same freezer door without any problem. Now it's everybody takes their turn and gives them enough space in between. So there is still that fear, but the friendliness seems to be in the local neighborhood, in the surrounding areas, versus in a grocery store.
Are they limiting the number of people allowed in the store right now?
Yeah, I think so. I took about a half an hour to get in the last time I went, versus normally you just walk in. So I think there's less people, but it's still a busy grocery store.
So they have people queuing up outside?
Yeah.
We have that here. I had to wait about an hour to get into one of our stores last week, and they won't let you in without gloves and a mask, of which I had neither. And this lady, 3 or 4 in front of me, just kept looking at me like with the look of shame, like, what's wrong with you? So she went to her car and got me a mask. And then as she handed it to me, she was that pity look. It was kind of funny, but so we got to take care of. We have masks and gloves now, so we're allowed out.
Nice.
Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, crazy. So what are you guys doing? How are you spending the time? We've got obviously all of us have a ton of free time on our hands now. So how do you guys, as a family, are you enjoying it? Is it stressful? So
I think for me, it goes in waves. There were days where I was like, oh, I'm going to get so many books read. I'm going to do so many these, everybody's putting out their free online courses. I probably signed up for 4 of them thinking I would do them. And then other days I struggle to keep up my relationship with God, and that's about all I accomplish in a day. But there are we have a yard that we're lucky to have, so we can be outside. We've done a lot of yard work. Probably looks better than it has in quite a while. I had a stump that's been in our front yard for about 10 years. So even before we moved here, and yesterday I got all rednecky on it and took a bonfire and, burnt it down to below ground and covered it up with mud and dirt today. So
did you have to have a note for that?
we chose to just see what would happen. There's a philosophy in France is if you don't get caught, it's not illegal. So we went with that, and so far so good. I covered it up with black dirt, and we'll see where it goes from there. But I work as part-time, not work part-time. I work full-time for the mission, but I partner with one of the local churches, and I'm helping on their leadership team a bit. And so we're doing a lot of devotionals, a lot of online not Bible studies, but online devotionals, Sunday services online. I've had to preach to an empty chair or to a computer screen and record myself doing that. So that's taken up some time, of course, preparing lessons and communicating, doing a lot of online communicating with with the church. And then we do a lot of English conversation groups normally. And now we're still holding those via Zoom calls. So that's kind of a fun way to just connect with people that we've connected with over the course of our years here, and continue to present them hope in ways of just showing that we still care about them, even when it's not in person.
Can you share a little bit more of the context of what you were doing before and how they've either been disrupted or kind of disbanded by city ordinances now to not have a number of people gathering? And you kind of already answered this, but I don't know all of the things that you were doing before this. So what are the things that were happening beforehand that have been changed? And then you kind of explained how you've responded and adjusted, but I'm curious.
Yeah, our main contact point with people that are outside of the church is through English conversation groups. Between ourselves and our site associates and our interns, we were at this point running about 6 conversation groups a week in 3 different locations. So a variety of different things going on. 4 different locations now. So we were doing 4 different locations, kind of drawing people into our relationship with people that care about them. And then our ultimate goal is to get them involved in what God is doing in their lives, and show them, the ultimate reason that we're here is to tell people that we love them and Jesus loves them also. We have different steps that go into the process, from an English group to a hey, I'm questioning about faith community type stuff, to a Bible study, and then into an invitation to church, or any step along the way. We had just started. We had held 2 of them prior to going into lockdown. Actually, the night, Thursday night, that the president of France here announced a lockdown, we were having a spiritual discussions question English group, where we had what ended up being our 2 leaders, 1 Christian, and ended up another believer came just on I'm interested in this, and one guy who was a non-believer, and he just goes, I don't understand it. I don't get why you believe this. So we had that conversation group happening. It was kind of a fun group. And then we said, oh, by the way, we won't be doing this again because we're in lockdown for a while. So, so that's kind of the idea, is to start a relationship and move them into a process to plugging them into church and into the life of Christ.
And before all of this, that's in person and in groups.
Yeah, in person and group.
Spaces.
We have 2 or 3 church locations that we were doing it at, in different facilities that they allowed us to use. and then one was locally here in a just had started up about October of this year, kind of a local co-working shop that loves giving workshops and stuff like that. So we were just getting together every other week to talk English and speak in English and that. So always, yeah, all in person. And now we just do everything online because that's about the only options we have. There's no gatherings there's zero gatherings of people happening outside of your home.
Hmm. How's the national church, the church you're involved in, how are they responding? And are they freaked out? Are they kind of pretty steady? How are they?
Yeah, for the most part, the churches that I've been in contact with have just, as you see many of your churches in the United States doing, or other parts of the United States doing, many of them have switched to an online type of service, recording their message and putting it out, and having elders and pastors call their attenders and their members of the church to make sure everybody's doing okay. Our small groups are mostly meeting by Zoom. There's even one that's still doing their video-based discussion with sharing the screen that somebody else is doing, and continuing their small groups that way. Not nearly as good because you don't get to share a meal with them that was cooked together, right, to really get in, and there's not there's this conversation taking place and this conversation taking place over here, which are usually when in small groups, that's when the real ministry happens. Sometimes it's more everybody's just talking together. So they responded decently well, but I don't know how long. God knows how long it'll continue, but I don't know how long they're going to be content with it being by Zoom and not face to face. So, but I don't know how much we can control that besides just continue to offer the hope of the gospel to the people that tune in to listen, I guess.
A common concern for a lot of churches here stateside is the economics of all of this, the loss of jobs. And so then, the way that many churches exist, budgets off of people's giving. Is that a similar dynamic for churches in France?
There is of course that worry for a lot of the churches. Most of them have had a decent reserve that has been built up, the ones I've been talking to, and can continue to go okay, even without it. One of the things that's a little bit different living in a more socialist country, I'm not saying it's a socialist country, but more with a little more social security than in the US, there is quite a few people that even as they're put into unemployment, there's a good amount of their revenue that they'll get, no matter if they were small business owners or self-employed. There is opportunities that have been put out there for some financial input, and hopefully with the duration, we'll see how long that lasts and what changes that'll make. But yeah, there are definitely churches that are not probably not going to make it in this time, because they just won't have the resources for a pastor or their building or the rent that they were paying. So we'll continue to pray for them and try to see what God can do to provide for them.
Yeah. I don't know this answer either. Are many of the pastors or church leaders bivocational, or are they pastors full time for work?
Yeah, most of our pastors are full time in the church, receiving a very minimal salary. So not a lucrative business in France as a pastor. Like, I don't really know where there is a lucrative business to be a pastor. So they receive some sort of salary. Many of them are at retirement age, or past retirement age. So they do get some of their income from Social Security. Many of them, have their wife working at the church, and they receive their Social Security income. So,
wow. What, as you think about, pastors are obviously in a vulnerable spot too. But in your society in France, is there a particular group of people who you think are most vulnerable to all that's going on? Not even necessarily physically from the virus, but economically, culturally.
Yeah, I think,
that.
you know, we look at it, I think there's two that's an interesting thing. The outbreak of COVID or coronavirus here actually was epicentered around an evangelical church here in France. They met right before the outbreak happened, and a lot of the cases were traced back to that church. So there is a pushback to the evangelical movement here, saying, you guys, you know, brought this to France, and that's where it's spreading. So it kind of gives us there's some persecution there. Persecution is the wrong word. There's some people that see that as a reason to further distrust the church. So there hasn't been attacks that I know of, besides some verbal phone calls that a couple of our pastors have gotten, and things like that. But there are some implications there, and then of course those that are without, homeless or the refugees. They're definitely feeling this a bit differently than I am, as you know, I still have a house with my family and kids and can go out and get food. There was actually quite a few homeless people that got penalized for being out, and were fined for not having their paper on them saying that they could go out. Well, most of them didn't know. So it's just one of those things that they're being tried to be, the government is trying to say everybody just needs to stay put, but they're going like, if I stay put, there's no food here, there's no water here, I've got to go somewhere to find food and water. And then the police officers, and doing their job, are finding them, or at least telling them to move along, and it's a sad state.
Sure. And where are most of those refugees coming from? Are they mostly North African or?
North and sub-Saharan African. So there's quite a bit from Africa. There's quite a bit from also from the Syrian refugees, all around. I mean, most of them are. That's a relative term. I don't want to say most of them, but quite a few of them are on their way. Everybody wanted at some point to get to the UK. That's kind of the path of the migrant workers, because that's where it seems that they can have the most chance to get a job, and then they get held up here because this is where they try to sneak onto trains or whatever. So it's a influx of people from around the world.
With working with Envision, a lot of our time and energy is spent with teams and interns. And I know in our case, I'm sure for David too, we have no interns at the moment because we've canceled, and they probably should have. The same thing with teams, like almost all of our teams are canceling. And then the rest that haven't canceled are thinking about it. And that's going to open up like my calendar is like wide open. And I'm kind of asking myself, all right, what in the world am I going to do with all my time now? So I'm sure you're in the same boat. Talk to me a little bit about that, and maybe not necessarily even in a negative light, although it is painful to have that loss. But what are maybe some new opportunities you're looking at in light of a lighter schedule?
Yeah. One of the things that we've been talking about is what does ministry look like if we don't have interns, if we don't have teams, and it definitely goes, man, we don't get to pour into that, I don't want to say next generation of leaders, but we don't get to pour into to leaders. That's one of the things we love. We don't get to pour into the leaders from the U.S., but it might open doors for us to have a little more time to say, okay, who are the leaders in our local churches that we're partnering with, that we can pour into, that we would have normally taken an intern to do this. Can we take one of those leaders and say, hey, can you help us in this? Or can we just talk about what it means to lead, from a place of service, to lead like Christ did? So it does open a few doors, because it'll give us a little more time to do that. We still have interns that are on the schedule, but if the lockdown continues, it's going to be an interesting time to see, like, okay, when are people going to be able to travel again? So some of it is we just don't know when it's going to end. So we're just going to go, what do we plan? So, but it's somewhat just giving us opportunities to develop leaders here a little bit more. I'm kind of looking forward to that, and what that might look like. But also missing out on the opportunity to say, to introduce people from the United States to ministry in France and Christianity in France, which is different. So.
Sure. Yeah. I wanted to kind of, I guess, talk to you a little bit about maybe some of the other, what are some positive things that you can see coming out of this? I mean, you mentioned pouring into local leaders, but God does everything for a reason, or He allows everything for a reason. It wasn't a cliche to say that it's not a surprise to Him, but how can you see this, really changing in a positive way in future ministry for you guys, besides the local, investing in local leaders?
Yeah, right now I'm, in complete honestly, I'm really struggling with what that might look like. I'm really,
Yeah.
I'm really going like, okay, so most of our ministry is gathering people under one roof, under one building to get to know them, to let them get to know their other people. So I think so it's either going to go like everybody's going to get out and want to do those type of things, or everybody's going to get out and say, no, I still don't need that. I don't want that in my life, because that's where viruses are spread, and so that'll put an end to that. So some of the idea of what does ministry look like next for us is kind of up in the air of going, it kind of depends on how people respond. And it kind of, I don't want to say fear scares me, but kind of makes me nervous on what are we going to do. And so that's some of the stuff that we're praying and throwing before God, of saying, God, what is it we're supposed to do after this? How are we supposed to gather people together when maybe there's a fear of gathering together nowadays?
Yeah.
I like that response, because it, even though we're a few weeks into this, it still feels like the early days of all this. And I've thought about this a number of times now. One of the things that I think we all try to do in professionally, because it is our work, but in ministry, is recognize the context that we're in. And I think personally, I don't feel well versed enough yet to even suggest or kind of think about what opportunities there are. Not quite yet. You are starting to notice. I am starting to notice. I imagine you and your teams are as well, seeing potential needs. And yet there is still, I think, a need for us to be diligent in understanding the needs of this time and the opportunities that are coming across our way. So I like that answer, Tony. I think it's good, even though it might feel like a non-answer. I think it is a good answer, because when we move to these new places, we spend time learning what the needs are, learning where the opportunities are. And I feel, in a sense, like I just landed on new shores, and I'm looking at this new country, this new culture, this new context, going, first, God, where are you at work? We know, Brandon, you kind of said this, that God's at work in our world. I mean, we have to believe that at our core. And so I think my responsibility today is trying to see where God's at working in my context, in my neighborhood. And I think for me personally, it feels like new territory. And that's, I guess, what I hear you saying too, Tony.
Yeah, I think there's I don't want to say a massive culture shift, but a culture shift of what it is. The French are very well known for giving the French kiss, not the one you think of, but the kiss on the cheek. That's the way they greet. Men greet men that way, women greet men that way, men greet. Anyway, so you give the kiss, and one of our language groups says, ladies, that she's a retired lady talking, and she's like, I'm never giving the bees again, the kiss again, because that's just, I don't want to get that close to people. And I jokingly said, I think that means you have to give up your French citizenship if you're willing to give up that part of the French culture. But that changes. So just, that jokingly probably won't be gone away with, but it may be a while before that practice or whatever form of greeting takes place changes. So that happens so expand that out to ministry, to church gatherings. in many ways, our churches and church philosophy for many years is get as many people into the room as possible, and then get them into as many rooms as possible through small groups or home studies and all this kind of stuff. Well, how do you do that when people are scared to get into rooms? Or how do you do that if people are worried about what happens when you're in a room? So what does outreach look like when you want to get people involved in the local church, the local ministry, or with local believers, and we're always asking them to gather in somebody's home. And maybe a home is better than a church building in the future because it's smaller, you control who's there, and it might open doors to more missional community type ideas or home church ideas where you're not in a large building.
Tony, I think you had told me prior to this that you were working on some Holy Week teaching and preparing for online gatherings. I'm curious because the future seems so far away and still so unclear. In the midst of it, you have been working with the group to plan some Easter type things. What's the message that you're sharing? What's the communication? What are the focuses you're turning people to in the midst of this, during this historical time that we celebrate every year, and yet again in a new context today? What's the focus that you are?
Yeah, one of the great things is we work with a team at the church that I'm part of, and somebody else is doing that right now as far as the Holy Week stuff. But he's gone through. He started with growing in the darkness. So that's the Good Friday theme, that there's still opportunities to grow even in the darkness. And so he's using, different scripture readings, different ways to communicate that even when things are unknown or even when things seem lost, you can still have an opportunity for growth. And then his service for Sunday is surprise, it doesn't stay dark, and kind of giving that hope. And that's where we're constantly saying there is hope, even when all seems lost and crazy around you. There's hope in the secure salvation of Jesus Christ that he offers at this time. So I don't know what other hope you can offer right now to anybody. You can't place your hope in confinement because it takes one little virus to get through a window that's open, and your whole house could be contaminated. But you can be secure in where eternity ends, and that's a better place to be focused on anyway. But we lose sight of that. We get caught up in our like what's gonna make me happy today. What am I missing out on? I'm missing restaurants, or I'm missing being able to exercise between 10 and 7 p.m. or maybe not me, maybe other people. But so that's one of those things we can get caught up in what we're missing, or we can say, okay, I'm going to lean into who God is at this time and trust that he's still the same as he was yesterday. He's going to be the same as he was tomorrow. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good. I was just thinking through, I've been thinking through too, like as we sit in this, we're so used to being so busy, 12-hour days, constantly doing, if it's not work activity, it's, running our kids here, there, and everywhere, or some other event. And now we've basically been put in like a longer Sabbath, and it can be uncomfortable for a lot of people. But I'd love to hear from both of you. How are you personally handling the sitting in silence? What are you hearing from the Lord? How does that work for you? How is the slowing down? How is that good for you and for everybody, really? Maybe in a little more depth.
David, you want to answer that one first?
Sure. I think for me personally, it's been a trying time, and that's the most honest I can be. I think it's been more challenging than expected. I think the sudden change, and then what has felt like ongoing consistent change, has been far more disruptive than I expected. And that disruption has caused me to consider a number of a number of things. I think it's revealed in me a handful of faulty foundations. I think one of you kind of alluded to that already. Tony was saying the way we get busy, the way we distract ourselves, and I think it's challenged some of that in me. And so having to engage that is what I've tried to be as committed as possible to, trying to engage it, and yet at the same time giving myself grace, because these are difficult, trying times. Instantly there seemed to be a collective decision to make the most of it, and that inevitably felt like pressure to do the project that I've been putting off because now I have all this time. Or, and Tony kind of said this too, read the stack of books that I've had next to my bed on the long list of books I need to read. And it didn't take me too long to realize that was not helping, that was adding to the stress. And so I had to even address that as well. So, what it's meant for me personally is this slowdown has actually given me space to reflect a little more deeply. And I've tried to be committed to at least once a day processing some of the deeper things as they come up. Yesterday, I felt a different emotion that I had felt over the last few weeks, and I woke up feeling angry. And I think that's a justifiable emotion, and it's a healthy one, handled correctly, I suppose I should say. And so that caused me to reflect and process and go a little bit deeper into some of the below the surface kind of places for me, and that's actually been healthy. And so I think it's been an opportunity for me in the slowness, in the stillness, in the quietness, even though there is still lots of noise to distract, to go to some of those deeper places. And it has not been easy. It has been very challenging, and yet I think it has been fruitful.
Yeah, I would just add to what you're saying. I felt that the whole concept of taking advantage of this opportunity feels like, to me, and I understand it's probably coming from a good place when people say that, it feels like an excuse to continue to fill the space so that we avoid the deeper things.
Yeah.
Because now we were able to avoid it so much because we were so busy, we ignore the deep issues of our soul. And so when they say take these 5,000 different seminars and classes and read these books, it's just a way to fill that space. And being able to sit in it is not comfortable. And so I've even had to wrestle with issues of identity. Like, my whole life has been in pursuit of being a missionary. And so now that I'm basically sidelined, not 100%, but 80% probably, if I'm honest, I'm having to wrestle, all right, where is my value? Is it in all the things that I do as a missionary, or is my value in Christ? I think that being forced to sit in it is uncomfortable. So yeah, I totally resonate with what you're saying.
And I just had to very simply say, these are things I have to grieve. I can't ignore it. And grief is a healthy process. It's a long process, and it can be a very painful process. But I think it's odd to say fortunately, unfortunately, either way. Aaliyah and I have experienced significant loss on the field. And so we've developed, because I do think it is a skill that we can cultivate, the practice of grieving. And so after the initial shock of this specific current disruption, both of us felt the sense of, these are things that we have to grieve. And so one very simple practice that we've had is I started a document on my computer called the COVID-19 loss list. And I've begun writing all the things that have been changed, that have been canceled, the expectations that we are looking forward to professionally and personally that have suddenly disappeared. And those are things that are sad to lose and things that need to be grieved, because if we don't, the temptation is to put them in all the wrong places, and then we do end up with false identities, taking value and from all the wrong places. And so that's been our way through it. And yeah, it has been difficult, but I think it's been healthy.
Yeah. I was going to tie the two things you guys were saying together about it's a forced rest and the idea that, oh, we have to figure out our identity. One of the things, I was talking with somebody else today, one of the other Brandon that's in my life, Brandon Hillstead, and we were talking about, everybody was like, oh, take this as like a 2-week sabbatical or all these type of things. And I'm like, yeah, but people who take sabbaticals plan them out for years, not years, maybe months at least, where they're like, these are the books, this is how I'm going to do it. This was all just thrown upon us. And instead of saying, instead of being able to be like, I'm going to release this to you for a time, everything was just taken away. So it just wrecks your identity of going like, oh, I used to be able to do this, or I used to, this was this, and all these people looked up. So it wrecks your identity, and you just weren't planning for it. And I know there are many other more tragic things in being locked into your house that tragically can happen. And I know, David, you've experienced that. Brandon, you've experienced that. Everybody's experienced worse things than being locked in their home. Probably even worse things than if you have to others lose their job or whatever. But it's the sudden, swift change that took everything that you were doing and said, none of that matters. I saw somebody in a honest post on Facebook was like, I was deemed non-essential. My job's no longer mine, and here I sit with no job and no way to support my family. So it's not that, it's not that we aren't grateful for the continued work, being able to continue to work, but it's the idea of like, man, it's just thrown upon you with nothing, with no warning, no idea that this was coming. That's where it's at. And I think the idea of grief is a great one to continue to lean into. My wife just posted something about, some of that anxiety or the discomfort you feel, that is grief, that you need to figure out, what are you grieving that you lost? Is it relationships that we missed opportunities of? Are they dreams that aren't going to happen now, may never happen again? Are they all these different things where you're just going to go, yeah, all right, I need to grieve that. I need to figure out how God's going to use that to continue to reveal his identity in me.
And Tony, you already pointed out to the fact that we have hope. And I think that's where we do have something to share. We have hope that we can share. But I also read an article by N.T. Wright, and I think it was for Time Magazine. Did any of you guys see that? Where he talked about how where the church or
the church doesn't have the answer. It's not supposed to.
Yeah, we don't have expertise, and we don't have the answer medically. I mean, I'm not a medical professional. No matter how many articles I've read so far on how the coronavirus is spread and how to mitigate that transmission, I'm not an expert in these things.
Right.
But something that we can have expertise in, and probably ought to, is in this practice of mourning and grieving, because that's clearly instructed to us. One of the verses I've been reading the last few days is in Matthew 5. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I've read that over and over and over again and tried to understand that. And so N.T. Wright's encouragement, or at least the way that I read it, was the thing that we can offer as the men and women of God is to lead that way, because this is a place that we can have expertise and can be influential. And so I read that, and I felt that, and I was encouraged by that, and I felt like it gave me some clarity, because one of my questions I've asked is, what can I do in this? Like I told some friends, I wish I had some medical background so that I could at least go do something. But then that gave me clarity, that article, to say we do have something we can offer, and we ought to lead into those strengths. And so I'm encouraged by you guys, knowing that you're thinking similarly, and also thinking, okay, this is something that we can do. We can help people collectively grieve and mourn and get through this in a healthy way, and point them towards hope, because the promise is that those who mourn will be comforted. So I'm encouraged by that. I'm encouraged by you guys. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you for that too. I think it's good to be reminded of the scripture that reminds us that it's okay to mourn,
Yeah.
and comfort can come and will come.
Yeah,
for sure. I guess we've been going now for about 45 minutes, so we should. I don't want to go real long. Too much
Nobody
longer,
wants
but
us to go real long, I doubt.
no, probably not.
All
But
two
I
of
do
you
want
will
to.
be watching this.
That's right. That's right. I do want to ask, how we obviously are trying to stay connected to our supporters. Just reality, we've all been cut 10% of our salaries, and probably most of the world is being affected economically. And how have you been able to stay connected to supporters? What are you telling them? How yeah. Well, I guess Tony and David. Question for both of you.
Yeah, I guess I've upped my email communication with people and being very just kind of letting people know what's going on when there's nothing going on. So it's kind of a balance of just making sure we're staying connected the best we can. Reaching out to the churches that support us to let them know we're praying for them, offering that opportunity to pray with us, to pray with them. But that's about all I've been able to do. I, of course, respond back to all the emails that any response that they give. Grateful for those who continue to support, continue to sacrificially give, of course, and still praying that God continues to cause people to give not only to the C&MA but their local church, not only to our support account, all that, but to our local churches. But in many ways, we haven't had opportunity to connect in different ways besides just a more frequent communication.
Yeah.
Tony, is there anything that you would say if anyone other than the two people who we project will watch this to the greater Alliance family? Any word of encouragement, or what would you want them to know?
That God's still got this, and no matter what happens, no matter what the future holds, He still holds the future. Does that sound kind of cheesy? That did sound kind of cheesy, but it's where I feel is that God's still working on this. He's not done ministering through the C&MA. He's not done ministering through His church. Don't give up on it and continue leading in.
I'd say, the Alliance is a movement. We've weathered some other tough stuff. 2 world wars, Great Depression, and yet the work has continued. And it's changed it each time, but it's continued. And for all 3 of us, and probably all of our colleagues, we don't do this for the salary that we get, but because we're called to it. But we are committed to it. And I just want to say thanks to all our supporters. It just means an incredible deal to me and for you guys too. So please continue to give as you can to the work of the Alliance, and because I think too that once this passes, with the changed landscape that we've talked about, there's going to be some incredible opportunities. And because we haven't left where we're at, we're going to be able to be very responsive and be able to react quickly as soon as we're allowed to.
Yeah, in some of the conversation groups that I've had with nationals that are living here full time, some of their response was like, "Oh, you're still here?" I'm like, "Man, this is my home. This is where I've lived for 8 years. Besides a year of home assignment, I'm not leaving just because things get rough." So
right,
we're here, we're loving them, we're caring for them from a adequate, safe, and social distance, but we still love and care for the people that we serve.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I appreciate you guys, and I'm gonna end the recording. And thanks for your time. Appreciate it, and hopefully we'll get to do it again.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah.